I haven't made a video in a while, so I guess I'll pop one off here so you know I'm not dead. Although yesterday was my birthday, so I'm officially a year closer to that. So thought for today, my dog is outside, so I can't actually show you what I wanted to. I'll just have to describe it. And, I don't have a professional videographer or the time to do that myself, so you'd probably just have to listen to my explanation anyways. So I have this husky, and her name is Jess. And we call her Fat Jess ever since she got spayed, because she loves food now, and she doesn't know how to self-regulate. So she will consume any food that is available until it's gone. And that's fun because we have other dogs. Anyway, so Jess, even before she was spayed, she had this very distinct personality where if she wanted to be affectionate, she would come to you and be affectionate, and then she'd skedaddle maybe 5 seconds, 15 seconds later in quite drastic action. She'd just take off like a rocket ship as if something spooked her or something hurt her or something. So that's always been funny with her. And she's still that way, although ever since she got spayed, you could have up to a few minutes of time scratching her neck before she jets off. She is very strong-willed, even for a husky. And sometimes when you call her, she'll come, but most times she'll pretend like she doesn't hear you. And that's really funny to watch when you can see her face while you're calling her, and she just kind of pretends like she can't hear you. So what can we learn from Fat Jess as far as messengers of light go? So, like my dog, these people consume everything in their path, not food, but light. And because of that, they tend to be fat, not necessarily in a corporal way, but in a spiritual way. And so if you're familiar with the Old Testament, fatness is usually a positive thing. It indicates prosperity, and it's used symbolically in a spiritual sense often. So these fatzos, sometimes they come when you call, but most times you just have to respond to them, because they will come over when they have something to say or something to do. And again, if you read through stories of prophets through the scriptures, you'll find that they do respond to people's inquiries sometimes. Often they are sent by God in response to people's inquiries. So for example, when Hezekiah prayed, king of Israel, Isaiah showed up to answer his prayer. And that's actually a pattern you'll see more than once in the scriptures. And if you are wondering why that happens, it turns out that we have the capability of asking questions that we don't have the capability to receive answers for. And so God, in his grace and compassion, he will arrange circumstances so that through the faith of other people, combined with your own, you can receive answers to questions that you have. And it's very unfortunate that that's not a more commonly understood principle, because I, for one, have had the unfortunate experience of participating in that feedback loop and having a person not be interested in those things when we both know they were praying for them. So anyway, back to Fat Jess. So she actually responds to that, by the way. It's a term of endearment in some places, calling a thing what it actually is. Who would have thought that that'd be viewed positively? But in some places in South America, for instance, it's very common to call someone fatty if they're indeed fat, or skinny if they're indeed skinny, or shorty, or I guess we don't have an English equivalent for someone who's tall, string bean or something. I don't know. But tally, if there were an English word for that. And those of you who've lived south of the border, you know what I'm talking about. So Fat Jess when she comes to you, you take the greatest advantage you can of scratching her neck because you don't dictate those interactions. She does. She's the gatekeeper of that, right? And God is a gatekeeper of our interactions with him. And we can and should pray to him all the time. But we do not dictate when he comes to us or when he speaks to us. So when he does either of those things, either through his own voice or the voice of his servants, we really need to pay attention. We need to do all we can to drop whatever else it is we're doing and extract the greatest value out of that. And in fact, it's not just a matter of responding. So with Jess, when she comes over and you're petting her, there's always a moment where you can tell she wants to go. And this is kind of fun with the dog because it becomes a game of how long you can keep her around past the point that she'd leave if you just left her alone. And she'll actually like whine. Huskies are funny in that they can talk somewhat sometimes. They're very willful creatures, so when they feel like it, I guess. But she'll usually mouth off when she wants to go, and then it's even more the rocket ship thing, so that's funny. But in a spiritual sense, it's not funny, it's very important. And this is what happened with Jacob and why he was named Israel. Part of why he was named Israel was that he would not let go of the Lord. When the Lord came to him, he grappled on and became known for that. And so you can find other examples of this principle in the scriptures when people would say things, like they would invent reasons to keep the person around. I'll put it that way. So, for example, Abraham, this is a very rich story. When the three messengers came, he kept them there. And he did this because he understood the covenant. And I don't want to get into all that. There's a lot of sacred cows that we'd have to kick along the way, and that's not something I'm trying to do today. But he kept them around as long as he could so that he could input into the principles he understood everything he could, knowing full well, based on the character of God, what was going to come out the other end of that. There are other examples too. So Gideon, I believe, he tries to offer a sacrifice to the angel that comes to him, and so on. So, Manoah, Samson's dad, when an angel comes to announce Samson's coming birth, Manoah tries to keep him around by asking him his name. And name doesn't just mean my name is Rob. He was asking the person to not just identify who he was in the hierarchy of heaven, but also reveal something about how he was. And it's interesting because the angel's response is not fully clear in the translations we have, but if you look into the Hebrew and you have your eyes open, you'll see that the angel says, "Why should I bother telling you my name? You wouldn't comprehend it." And that's fun, and also another lesson of about interacting with these sorts of folks. You have to be prepared to receive reactions from a level of awareness that exceeds your own. So I said that pretty carefully, but you will find as you read through the scriptures, example after example of, I should say hint after hint of this principle. There's this prevalence that somehow we have anything close to the full story in the scriptures, and I'm not sure where that comes from. I don't mean the fullness of the gospel, which is a list of principles. What I mean is, although that's interesting too, because it's not given as a list of principles, and there's actually quite a valuable secret locked into that. But skipping over that, we presume that we have something approaching real life. We have a lens on the situation as if we were there. And it's, I think, an absurd position. So Jesus' ministry was around 3 years long. And And yet, look at what we have in the Gospels. That's not 3 years worth of content, folks. So if you were out preaching in the street daily, or even near daily, or even just some of the time, you'd have way more content. If all you did was give one sermon every Sunday for 3 years, you'd have way more content than what we have in the New Testament. So to think that somehow we have an accurate whole picture of that, of how Jesus was conversationally, it's absurd. So anyway, but there are clues there. So in Luke, it says something like, Jesus says something to his disciples, and they have questions, but it says they dared not ask him because they were afraid what he might say. And that's very interesting, isn't it? Because they knew that they were not able to accurately predict when what they were saying to Jesus was going to engender a neutral response, or when it was going to engender a severe response, either positive or negative. They had no idea what he was going to do or say next. But they knew enough about him that they knew they didn't have any idea what he was going to do or say next. And so when you read the Old Testament accounts of interacting with prophets, they do crazy things that no one's expecting. They tear their clothes, they bake bread and poop, they lay on their side for years, they shave random parts of their body, they run around naked, they marry prostitutes. You never know what they're going to do next, right? And you get used to that. And in the culture, you see that, because whenever someone did something weird in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, people expected that this meant something. They started paying attention to anything out of the norm. They'd pay attention. They're like credit card fraud algorithms. When you go to a country and you're traveling, you didn't tell your credit card company, and so all of a sudden there's a charge in Spain, and you don't live in Spain, they're going to call you and say, is everything okay? Or they're going to decline the transaction. You know, it's like that. Where in ancient Israel, people would pay attention when something was out of the norm. They'd expect that there was something meaningful in it and that they should pay attention. But we don't do that. We say, oh, this doesn't match my expectations. It must be meaningless or bad. Anyway, so you want to extract everything you can out of them, and you want to contrive reasons to keep them on the line. So you call them, and them, it's me or my servants. You call on God all the time. And sometimes he answers in ways that you perceive, and sometimes you don't perceive him answering. I said that carefully on purpose. The truth is, every time you request anything from God with a pure heart, it's like he puts the package in the mail. And the issue is we perceive delays when, in fact, one, the delay is always on us. Two, it consists of specific things that have to happen to maximally prepare us to receive what we've requested. And I'll tell you specifically, two facets of this are, one, when he sends things, he will always begin at the thing we should have asked for. And so, depending on how many upward connections that thing has in the hierarchy, whatever it is that we desire, there might be something where the true fulfillment of that desire is massively greater than anything we could have expected. And that's where he'll start. And it's only as we reject things, he comes down to where we are. And I've spoken about that before. It's a principle I call palliative care when you get to the bottom. And he will give you what you desire, but he'll always try to give you what you should desire first. The other thing is, even when what you're asking for is a maximal blessing, which there's really only one maximal blessing. I'll just ruin that secret for you. But anyway, even when you're asking for what you should ask for, typically not having it has as much to do with not being prepared for it as it does anything else. And so in asking for it, you are actually asking for a cluster of things that includes all the experiences you need to receive the maximal value in that thing. or that person or that experience, whatever it is you're asking for. And God is not slack. He is on it. And anytime we ask for anything, if you knew how much he loved you, it's heartbreaking to see so many people use the very evidence of God's love as evidence that he doesn't love them. So, I have yet to meet a person who wouldn't be overwhelmingly shocked to know how much God actually loves them. And that is just based on what I know. And I don't know everything. So, you call out to God all the time for the things you really want. And that's not just for yourself, it's for other people too. And then you better pay attention when they come, because they're going to come in ways you don't expect and at times you don't expect. Watch and pray always, for you don't know the hour that your Lord comes. That's not just talking about the second coming. There are so many things in the gospel that are hierarchical chains. And in a sense, the second coming, that's the end of that chain. But there's so many things before that. You could pray for a better job. And if you're not watching and praying, you won't see the opportunity right in front of your face. And as you gain in wisdom, you'll look back on your own life and see an unending chain of times where God was doing everything he could to pump your life full of joy. And the only limit he had was he didn't want to explode the balloon. I tell you a truth. There is a level of joy possible to feel in this life that if you don't undergo the necessary process, it would kill you to feel it. It would kill you. And you don't have to take my word for that. Go read the scriptures. We read about incomprehensible joy, which means joy that you can't quantify except through experiencing it. It is literally impossible to explain to another person that level of joy. We read about joy that overcame people. They literally collapsed because the joy they felt overwhelmed their body. And the joy that the righteous will experience in the resurrection is so great that it would overwhelm a mortal body to death. So God has great things to give us. So we should call out to him to lead us to these things and then pay attention. And it'll come in ways that you don't expect and at times that you don't expect. So pay attention even when you're not asking for things, because God knows the desires of your heart and he knows what you have need of before you ask him. And he is constantly operating. He has an army of agents that work on his behalf to bring to pass the fulfillment of his character. And his chief quality is love. But one of his other qualities is justice. And there's a way for all things to be fulfilled. That's not magic. It's a process, it's a series of laws. And you have to figure out what your role is in all of that to receive as much as you're willing to receive from him. So this has already been way longer than I wanted to, and we've verged off a little from the whole allegory of the dog. But I did want to flip this around, and so this will be my closing set of thoughts. Who knows where this will go? But I want to bring up I said a lot of things in the gospel, they're chains of increasing intensity. They're hierarchical experiences. So one of these is sort of the inverse of what I'm talking about with scratching the dog. And that is, instead of calling out to God, and instead of recognizing the way he's sending things, typically people do the opposite. And what they do is they're not watching. They really think that they have a grasp on how it is that God's going to give them what they seek. And then when it comes, instead of grabbing onto it and not letting go, they side note, the other day I said I have other dogs, I have other huskies, and we had a lot of bones around. And mostly because of Fat Jess and her new obsession with food, they got into a big fight. And so I ran in and I separated them, and luckily I didn't get bitten. But I was sprawled out on the floor, and I had one dog in one hand, one dog in another hand, and somehow, I don't know how, I was holding another dog with my foot. And my wife came to the rescue to get for backup, and it was quite an amazing thing. So that is an example of holding on to things. But instead of grappling on and holding on and doing whatever we can to extract everything there is from whatever it is or whoever it is that God's sending us, this is what we do instead. This is from Isaiah 52:15. And people read this as an end times event. And they're correct. But this is not some mysterious one-time thing. It's merely the pinnacle example of an ever-present gospel circumstance. So it's talking about the end-time servant. It says, "So shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him. For that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider." So, I was not raised in Jewish culture, but I have spent a lot of time, I won't just say studying things that Isaiah talks about, but in the other prophets, but experiencing a great deal of them. And it's been interesting to have one foot in a modern American experience and another foot in something that transcends even ancient Israel and goes back far sooner. And so from that vantage point, looking in on this, I tend to see things that maybe aren't so obvious to others, to some others at least. So this is an interesting verse to me, because like a lot of what Isaiah says, it's a very high priority of his phrasing is poeticism, to an impressive degree, in fact. But there are so many different senses in Hebrew, and these things principally were translated by people from a linguistic standpoint, not a superior knowledge of the gospel standpoint. And what I mean by superior is, if you really want to understand what a scriptural author was trying to say, your gospel understanding has to be at least equal to theirs in that thing. And so to think that King James scholars or whoever else were able to do that, I think a lot of people give latitude to these folks thinking that, well, the Spirit can just inspire them to say the right thing, even if they don't understand what they're saying. I don't have any problems with that idea. I don't think it precludes a better, more correct interpretation, though. I'm shocked at how good a job they did do. But there's a lot of it that could be a lot better. And it's kind of surprising to me that so many people think that what is in the Bible, particularly how it is phrased, cannot be improved upon. And at the same time, those people will argue with others about which translation they're using. So that's interesting. Anyway, The second portion of this verse, where it starts, where the king shall shut their mouths at him, for that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard they shall consider. You should go into Bible Hub and look that up in Hebrew and search through all the senses of the words there. Because I think that there's a lot there that isn't in the text. So a lot of Isaiah in particular leans on this idea that you'll be familiar with these idioms or ways of phrasing things, like what does it mean when you say something and then say it again in a slightly different way. You'll have these couplets in a lot of verses. And there are people who have done an impressive amount of work with this sort of thing. But I've experienced at least the second half of this verse. And having experienced it, I'd like to explain it to you from my perspective. So there are a great number of people who go through this life in self-delusion, specifically in the sense that they know more than they do. They know better than what they do. And it's an almost universal thing. And even when you have someone who tries to do what's right, air quotes, most of the time, air quotes, a great percentage of the time, they're willingly doing what they know is not right. And this is not my theory. There are statistics on this. If you want to look something up called the Ash experiments, I'm going into detail in one of my books, maybe a few of my books on this. But you can look it up now, and that's spelled ASCH. And so Ash actually quantified how often people willingly do what they know is wrong, not even in a moral sense, and not even in dealing with the complexities of IQ, and not even really dealing with social pressures. Just very simple question asked in front of other people, and those other people give the clearly wrong answer. So what do you do? And to jump to the moral of the story, almost everyone will do what they know to be wrong almost all the time. That's crazy. That's crazy, and that's human nature. That's the facts. I think one thing one topic that I speak on that's highly resisted is human nature. And even people who know the scriptures, and it's very clear how humans are by nature since the fall, they'll fight on this, and they don't want to believe it. They want to believe people are intrinsically good, or that they have tendencies towards good, or they have good hearts. And if you really want to know how people are, I'll give you a real simple way to find out. You don't have to do research. You don't even have to read the scriptures. Just light a candle and hold it up and wait for the bullets, because they'll come, and it won't take very long. And the thing is you don't even have to take a moral position. Just say what is obviously true. And things are bad enough today that I will be surprised if you still have a job, if you still have friends, and if you still have family like you do today. Just do that. If you insist on saying what you seriously believe to be true, not about religion, not even about politics, about basic reality, just objective reality. The sky is blue, the sun is shining type stuff all the time. And especially when someone says something that they know is obviously not objective reality. And let me know how that goes. And if you get through that, if you can do that for a month straight, no exceptions, and not get fired, get marked for a layoff next time one comes around, get marked for not being promoted, lose friends, get terrible things said about you in public, have family members hate you, whatever, ghost you. If you can get through that for a month without those things happening, you let me know, and I will gladly revise my position. And if you're not willing to do that, or if you do that and what I'm telling you is exactly what happens to you, maybe you shouldn't disagree with me. on that point because you don't have a reason to. You haven't proven me wrong. So, could go further on that. I won't. Let's stick to the point. So Isaiah 52. This is the pinnacle of a chain of examples of a principle. And why it's the pinnacle is because the person who is Isaiah speaking about here will have more truth than anyone else. And so they will experience this to the greatest degree. Very simple idea. But the principle applies to everyone at every level. It's just the outcome will come commensurate with the input. It scales. And it scales exponentially, as most things do in reality, actually, it turns out. Certainly with truth and with the gospel. So what does this actually mean? Kings shall shut their mouths at him. So who are kings? So you could get into this big topic of kings of the Gentiles, and other people have said fine things about this. I will just say, people who think they know something will shut up. Why? That's the next part. That which had not been told them shall they see. That's not a good translation. We could get one step closer by saying something like, that which they saw but refused to perceive will be made undeniably obvious to them. That's closer to the original meaning, the intended meaning, I should say. Okay? And why that is has to do with the sprinkling of nations, which I won't get into right now. And I know I've talked about this before, but I'll probably say things here I haven't before, and it's relevant to this thing. And people aren't listening, so, hey, it doesn't hurt to repeat yourself, right? And that which they had not heard shall they consider. So we talked about seeing. There's a difference between visually detecting something, mentally recognizing it, and then doing the right thing about it, the appropriate response. So like if a baseball bat is coming for your face, your eyes can get the signals of a baseball bat moving without your brain reacting and you ducking. Those are all three separate things. So you might see the bat and be like, oh, it's just normal, whatever, sunshiny day. Or you might see the bat and say, this is a bat, and I should lean into it or do some kung fu move, right? And that would be a bad move because you'll end up with a busted face or a broken arm. Or you could say, duck. And that's the right answer, right? So you have three levels of reaction there. With hearing, it's the same. You could get the signal and ignore it, or not, well, it's different, not perceive it. You could perceive it and ignore it. You can perceive it, recognize it, and then you get to choose how to react to it, right? So I think a lot of times we think about gospel teaching as revelation of new things. And it can be that for sure, and it's valuable when it is. But most often, it's actually just hearing something you already know, or at least should know, but you didn't respond to it the first time, or the second time, or the 100th time. And so maybe it's explained in a slightly different way. Sorry, my screen just turned off. Or maybe it's explained just another time. Or maybe it comes in a way that's more acceptable to you. So, for example, parents really don't like hearing things from their kids. They don't like getting corrected by their kids, even when their kids are right. I should say most parents. I'm sure there's some parents out there who love the truth more than they love unrighteous dominion, because that's what it is. But I'd say that's less than 50% of the time. So maybe your kid tells you something and you don't want to hear, and so you ignore them. But then some stranger on the street comes up to you and says, oh, this, that, or the other, and you say, well, I'm willing to listen to you because maybe you heard from a friend first. And like that old song, heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend. Anyway, so you hear it from a friend, and you say, well, maybe what this person is saying is true, but I know them to be a flawed individual because I know them well. And who do they think they are? They're not better than me. They can't be right. Or if they are right, I don't care because they're not perfect, so I'm not listening. But then a stranger comes up and you say, well, I don't know this person. I have no basis to ignore them. And plus, if they know something about me without knowing me, maybe they're right. And maybe you listen. So that's an example. But anyway, so when you do this sort of thing, what you do is you take what they've been ignoring, because it all starts in your conscience. And it's real possible to dull that. It's easy. And people are good at it. And then it has to come from outside because you're not listening to the inside anymore. And it's not just a matter of if that little voice is annoying you, you just shut it in the basement. You can't put it in the basement without weakening it in volume and frequency. And typically it takes the interaction, the external stimulus from another person to jumpstart that again. It's kind of like a dead battery. And like a dead battery, it doesn't die all at once. There might be a little juice in there where you can turn the engine once or twice. And you're like, well, I'm good because the engine turns when I turn the key. I just don't turn the key very often. But it's there when I need it. But you've never started the engine in 6 months or 6 years or 60 years. And maybe you need to get a trickle charger on that, right? Or a quick jump start is probably a better analogy. If you want to restore it to how it was, you got to trickle charge it. That takes time. But usually messengers come with quick and fast. And like the dog, they come by when they want to be pet, and then they skedaddle. So, and they don't always come when you call. And typically people wait till they're in trouble to call on God. And what does he say? There's a scripture on this. He says, you were slow to listen to me when I was speaking to you, so I'll be slow to answer you when you call on me. And it's not because he's mean. Everything God does is because he loves you. And there are many ways in which if he acted how we would want him to, not knowing him, it would hurt us more than what he does instead. He always does what's best. Always. And so if you want to know what's best, look at what God does. That's what's best. It's not what you think is best. It's what he does. So anyway, maybe we'll get to the point here before this is an hour long. All these things are very valuable, so I don't mind saying them. But I have things to do, and I don't have an hour to take away from what I need to do. So, when you come in the name of the Lord to tell someone something, it's one thing for them to ignore you. It's another for them to fully comprehend what you're saying, for that baseball bat to connect to their face. And they respond by going dark. And I mean that in more ways than one. What they should do, is what the lady did at the well in Samaria when Jesus said that she had been with a whole bunch of guys. So that's an interesting way of framing that conversation, because I think most people would frame it differently, but that's really what happened. Is he said, well, you've been a really promiscuous lady. And instead of getting crazy or mad or I don't know, inventing some false accusation against him, which is probably what most people would do today in that situation, she said, wow, here's a guy that somehow knows, she said, everything about her. And I really hope there was more to her than how many guys she had slept with, but that's what she said. She said, here's a guy who knows my whole life story. And so she responded by going into town and telling everyone who would listen to her that she had found the Messiah and they should come listen to him too. What a crazy response. What an unusual response. What people do instead when they receive evidence that they're in the presence of someone who knows way more than they do about God and way more than they do about themselves, they just shut down and they turn off most of the time. Most of the time. And they'll take a day or a week or a month or a year or 3 years to come back to the person, if they ever do at all, and say, you were right about this and that. What do you think about this other thing? Or I've yet to hear, what do you think about anything? But, that's a super rare thing. What else do you have? What else do you have? Now, Fat Jess got fat by eating too much food. If you put more food in front of her face, she's going to eat it, right? If you want to be like Fat Jess, it's very easy. Eat all the food that's put in front of your face and go look for more. When she cleans out a dog food bowl, she scours the house for little treats that kids dropped or little crumbs that other dogs dropped. It's very easy. If you want, God is no respecter of persons. And if you want to be like Fat Jess, go do what Fat Jess does. Gobble up any food you find. So this is what this means. Kings shall shut their mouths, and etc. What they've never heard, they'll consider. It means that things are explained so clearly that not only are you forced to face what you willingly denied before, even though you knew it. You may have forgotten it in the meantime, but at some point you knew it. Not only that, but you get doused in evidence that this person knows more than you on other things too. And it's undeniable. So what are you going to do about it? And most people react by ghosting. That's what they do. Some people react by turning on the person and trying to squish them down by saying nasty things about them that they know are lies, usually publicly, to soothe their conscience. Now, I have a good picture of that, and I'll do a slideshow at some point. But basically, when something better than you manifests, the natural man will try to get out of that situation. And you can do that by turning away. You can do that by squishing that person down. And so you criticize them falsely. And if you're really sly, I'll give you a trick. You don't criticize them falsely. You just criticize them on some unrelated thing, right? So if I say, you neglect your kids, and I know this, I'm not guessing, like we've spent time together, and I even know I'm not the only person that's told you this. And you react by saying, I don't know, you have bad breath, right? Maybe I do. And if I do, I'll thank you for that and go brush my teeth. But it's irrelevant. That doesn't change the situation. You're still a neglectful parent, right? So people are funny, and we ought to be careful about human nature. And because most humans actually act quite a bit like animals, we could probably learn a lot by opening our eyes to the examples of the animals around us, even Fat Jess. So I'll leave it at that. I've probably given you enough to be offended on for the next week or two. I'm trying not to make these videos very often because I have to write books instead. But sometimes I'll check in from time to time when I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do. So I hope this helps somebody somewhere. Please don't respond by shutting your mouth. If you see the manifestation of greater light, the only appropriate response is to press into it, whatever that means. So when God, watch and pray always, and when he gets closer to you, the only appropriate response is to get closer to him.